Let me go back to Patrick Henningsen, if I may. It has come to something, Patrick, that the only defense these Canadian politicians have got is that they are incredibly stupid. Will this have any impact on their prospects of continuing in office?
Yeah, it's not exactly handicapping, is it, these days, George? In politics, yeah, I mean, that's not going to shock any of the Canadian electorate either. Unfortunately, Canada has this first past the post system. So I don't know how many decades it's been since there's been a leader that has more than 50% of the vote. Trudeau got 32%, I think, of 60% eligible that actually came out to vote in the last election. Hardly a mandate, but with the coalition they stitched together at the 11th hour, there he is again, once again. But I think this is a bridge too far. I think this is going to haunt him for a very long time because his brand has always been the virtue signaling, the latest thing, the current thing. He's always been sort of with it on the trends. So I think this is going to be long-term devastating for him. I mean, in his mea culpa, George, it said it all. He basically said, I'm sorry. The speakers apologized as if he himself doesn't take any responsibility for it. And then he says, we must guard against Russian propaganda and disinformation, literally in the same breath. That tells you really, I think, all you need to know about this cluster B personality sociopath. Sorry, I'm being kind. There's other things that have been said about him. But you know what's amazing about this is the final comment on this, George, is that, see, the opportunity in Ukraine by setting the stage, by engineering the events and the conditions to bring Russia, to bait Russia into a special military operation on February 24th, 2022. Okay, this allowed, and this is why I think this was engineered to absolute perfection, because they knew that they were losing the public opinion on expeditionary wars and humanitarian interventions over the years. They absolutely crashed with Iraq. Libya is a unmitigated disaster for Europe as well. That's directly at NATO's feet. Syria, the proxy war in Syria, and Yugoslavia, and the list goes on and on. This having Russia intervene allowed all these Western countries to absolve them of all of their past sins. This is why they've been almost evangelical about Putin's war of choice. You know, the tropes are there, like at the top of every heading. Putin's war of choice, Russia's war of aggression, etc. This allowed them to absolve them of all of their sins and to rekindle their love affair with international law. All of a sudden becomes relevant in U.S. discourse, political discourse, and on the media as well, who also are a partner to all of these undeclared illegal wars of aggression over the years at the hands of NATO, the United States, and Britain mainly. But this allowed them to do that and to rediscover their morality. And this is why this is what the excitement's about, because it's literally a chance to be reborn, in their eyes anyway, in the eyes of the Western public, to be legitimate once again. And they could then wage these moral crusades around the world in service of democracy and liberty. Okay, so I think that this is the main motivators, because let's face it, NATO's record is really, really bad, and half the world's leaders are probably looking at it like, why does it even exist in 2023? And it's given them a raison d'etre, and that's why I think they've clung to this issue. They're waving the Ukrainian flag ceaselessly because somehow they believe that this is the path to salvation for them.
Laurie Spencer, in the United States, you're blessed. In Britain and Canada, both the governments and the opposition are completely evangelically in support of NATO and the war. But in the United States, you have now not one but two serious candidates running for the presidency who are completely against this war and will end it or end their country's involvement in it if they are elected. How did that come to pass, that the anti-war side in the US is stronger than it is virtually anywhere else?
I don't know if that's saying much, George. We still can't get enough people in the streets here in the United States. Of course, we had the Rage Against the War Machine rally back in February and had a respectable crowd, but not nearly enough people. And still, when you look at our Congress, every time there's a funding package for Ukraine, the majority vote for it. There is, some opposition to the war. Strangely enough, on the Republican side, not a single Democrat is opposing the war except Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Yeah, but Trump and Kennedy are both making a significant part of their election campaign, which means, unless they're fools, that they think this has public traction, that the voters can be won to that position. And I'm pretty sure that they are right about that, not least because just like downtown Vancouver could do with some of the money that's been spent on Ukraine, every main street in America, every bridge, every highway could do with some of the 130 billion that's been sent to Ukraine. So the economic as well as the geostrategic issues are beginning to mature quite well. It's not long, until the American presidential election. Laurie, last word from you.
I just want to say that what Niall said was absolutely correct. Trudeau might play dumb, but he knew exactly who Yaroslav Hunka was. In fact, Hunka's daughter-in-law posted a photograph on Facebook of Yaroslav Hunka sitting in the private quarters of Justin Trudeau last Friday in his wheelchair, waiting to meet privately with Trudeau and Zelensky. And that is why Zelensky's been strangely quiet, and so has Deputy Prime Minister Freeland. And Trudeau must resign. Freeland must resign. And I think that
Yes,
all
every
338
cloud,
members of their parliament should resign as well.
Definitely. Every cloud has a silver lining, Laurie. If
Exactly.
not for what happened last week, Chrystia Freeland would have been the next Secretary General of NATO. She certainly ain't going to be now. Dr. Neil McCrae, last word to you before I wrap the meeting up. It's been a top meeting, I would say. What about the British? As I said, the so-called opposition is lockstep with the government on the war and on sending desperately needed public expenditure to a war thousands of miles away from us, over whether or not Kupiansk should be on one side of a line on a map in a country of which we know little, when it's been on different sides of different lines many times in the last 100 years. It's quite a feat to win both the government and the opposition to unquestioning support for such an enterprise. Is that going to hold? Is there any possibility of the British people falling out of love with their government and their opposition, not least because of this subject?
Well, again, I would draw a comparison to climate change. So we've got this clamour for net zero, and it's not just at national government level. Every council, city and county council up and down the country, and it's the same across the West. But just talking about the British experience for now, is that you get citizens turning up to council meetings, and what they hear is just almost, it's like a parallel universe where every single one of the councillors appears to believe, and that's not just Labour and Conservative and Liberal Democrat and Green, it's the independents as well. Every single one of them seems to believe that there is an urgent climate crisis, and they speak all the language of net zero and I need to do this, need to do that. And that's the way they've been on Ukraine. 650 MPs in Westminster Now, if you look at the COVID, there's a few MPs now that are speaking out against the COVID regime and the iatrogenic harm caused by that regime. But that's a small minority. You've got hardly anyone who would dare say they don't believe in a climate emergency. And with Ukraine, it's almost, I don't think there's been a single MP who said we should stop funding this war in Ukraine. But again, drawing the contrast with climate change, what we're now seeing with these net zero policies, with the road charging, with blocking roads, 20 miles an hour speed limits and all that sort of thing. I mean, in Wales, there's a huge backlash and it cannot be ignored. It cannot be ignored. And I think that scheme will be scrapped. So we're starting to see real pushback now, real resistance. There's a momentum. And when people join the dots, because that's the crucial thing here, people need to join the dots. And when they join the dots and see that their health services, their social services, their all the things that they're used to getting in their towns and communities are not being funded anymore, where is the money going? Well, a lot of it is being sunk into this money laundering scheme in Ukraine. And once people realize that, and once they properly begin to understand why this is being done, then we'll get some real resistance, and hopefully then we'll get good size marches on the streets.
Dr. Niall McCrae, author and social commentator, Laurie Spencer, journalist and historian, and Patrick Henningsen of 21st Century Wire, thank you for joining us on this No to NATO, No to War rally. And I ask the audience, whether watching now live or later, to make sure that you follow No to NATO, No to War on all the social media platforms to boost our numbers. Make a donation to the organization if you possibly can. And above all, spread the word about this great global movement that is gathering strength and gathering force to make a decisive change in the way we do things here in the NATO West. I've been George Galloway. You've been a marvelous audience. Thank you for joining us, and join us again for the next rally in 2 weeks' time. Good night.